What if the very thing that helped you survive is also the thing quietly exhausting you from the inside? There's a particular kind of person who reads people effortlessly, who walks into a room and immediately senses the tension, notices who's uncomfortable, picks up on what isn't being said, who has spent so much time observing, analyzing, and understanding the emotional landscape around them that it's become second nature, almost automatic. Psychologists sometimes call this heightened perceptiveness. But here's what they don't always explain. When this level of intelligence is born from pain rather than simple curiosity, it doesn't just make you more aware over time, it makes you chronically, quietly overwhelmed. This is what some researchers refer to as traumatic intelligence, a sharpening of emotional and social perception that develops as a response to unpredictable, stressful, or emotionally unsafe environments. And understanding it might be one of the most important things you can do for your own mental health. Here's something interesting about how the brain develops under stress. When a child grows up in an environment where emotional dynamics are unpredictable, a parent whose moods shift without warning, a home where conflict is frequent, or circumstances where emotional survival depends on reading the room correctly, the brain does something remarkable. It adapts. The amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection center, becomes highly calibrated. The nervous system learns to stay alert, and the mind develops an extraordinary sensitivity to subtle social signals, a shift in tone, a micro-expression, a silence that feels just slightly too long. In the moment, this is protective. It's the brain doing its job, keeping you emotionally safe by helping you anticipate what comes next. But here's the paradox that cognitive psychologists have noted. This same mechanism, when it runs continuously, becomes a form of chronic overload. You are no longer just noticing, you are constantly processing, interpreting, preparing. The prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning and emotional regulation, is essentially running at full capacity all the time. And that sustained activation has a cost. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, whose research on trauma in the body has reshaped how psychologists understand stress responses, described how trauma doesn't just leave emotional memories. It rewires how the nervous system perceives safety itself. For people who developed high perceptiveness through difficult experiences, the world is rarely felt as neutral. Even calm environments can trigger low-level alertness because the brain has learned not to fully trust the quiet. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever felt exhausted, not from what happened, but simply from being aware of everything around you? That's not sensitivity as a weakness. That's a nervous system that was trained to never fully rest. This is where the concept of overload becomes important. Traumatic intelligence isn't about being fragile. In fact, it's often the opposite. People who carry it tend to be highly capable, deeply empathetic, and remarkably perceptive. But they are also running a hidden background process that most people around them don't even see. Every conversation carries extra weight. Every relationship involves an extra layer of reading and interpreting. Every moment of tension in a room lands heavier than it would for someone whose nervous system wasn't trained this way. The challenge of healing isn't about becoming less perceptive. That intelligence, built through real experience, is genuinely valuable. The goal, as many trauma-informed therapists now emphasize, is about something more subtle. Teaching the nervous system that it no longer needs to work quite so hard. That safety, when it actually exists, is allowed to be felt. Researchers studying post-traumatic growth, a concept developed by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, found that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means integrating your experience into a more regulated, self-aware identity. And one of the most consistent findings in this research is that people who recover well aren't those who suppress their heightened awareness. They're the ones who learn to choose when to deploy it, rather than living inside it constantly. In practical terms, this often means developing what neuroscientists call interoceptive awareness, the ability to notice your own internal states with the same clarity you apply outwardly. Noticing when your body is tense without an obvious cause. Recognizing when your brain is interpreting rather than simply perceiving. Learning to distinguish between real signals in the present environment and echoes from old patterns. Practices like somatic therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and even structured journaling have shown measurable impact on the nervous system's baseline activity, not by removing sensitivity, but by gradually expanding the brain's tolerance for stillness. What's worth sitting with as we close today is this: there is nothing broken about a mind that became extraordinary at understanding the world around it. The brain that learned to read people so well didn't make a mistake, it survived. And in doing so, it grew in ways most people never will. But growth built from survival deserves to eventually graduate into something softer, a kind of intelligence that isn't driven by vigilance, but simply present, aware, rested. Because the most profound thing a sharp, perceptive mind can learn is that not every moment needs to be decoded. Sometimes, the most healing thing you can do is allow the world to simply be, and trust that you're safe enough to stop watching quite so closely.